Afternoon, everybody. It's time to talk about the weather. On my way over here, I saw a lot of topsoil blowing north. The visibility was low, and it's not, you can tell it's springtime. So it's a perfect time to come out and talk to you about the prospects for rain, since we haven't had much rain in a while. But I first wanted to just show you our front of our website, just to give you a glimpse of kind of a new product that we're going to be showing. Right here at the top of the page, if you go to just weather.gov, that's the National Weather Service. So weather.gov is our website / Corpus Christi. Takes you to our forecast office. There's a new GIS rainfall map. If you click on that map, it takes you to kind of a South Texas perspective of all the rainfall that's occurred in the last 24 hours. So it's a map we'll be producing daily. It's based off of rainfall that's estimated from the Doppler radar, combined with all the rainfall observers. There's about 250 people in South Texas that volunteer and send us rainfall reports. And so an example you can just go up and select any date that you wish. We have data going back only until November, but from this day, basically November of 2011 forward, we'll be collecting and showing some maps up here for you, but you can kind of view and see what it looked like this last February 5th when it rained a pretty sizable amount in South Texas and Orange Grove. In that area, they got over 6 inches of rainfall. So may be helpful when you want to know, did I get rainfall on my ranch, how much rain fell out in the rural areas of the coastal bend. This should be a handy product. But to get started, just to kind of recap the weather and the drought that we've experienced, there's a number of stations, official climate stations, which you see on this graphic, that are kept by the National Weather Service, that are monitored by the state of Texas climatologist John Nielsen Gammon. And they go back and look at rainfall every year to see how this year's drought compares with previous droughts. And just a pretty startling image right here really highlights how dry it was in 2011. As we look at all the years worth of information, 100 years worth of records in Texas as a whole, 2011 ranks as the #1 driest year on record. And not by a little bit, by a lot. It stands out well below the curve of even the driest years of 1917, the 1950s droughts, and the 1930s drought, the Dust Bowls. In those particular years, it was dry across Texas, but this year was the driest. What's different about the other droughts in the 30s, it lasted longer. That particular drought lasted, 7 to 10 years. The 1950s drought was similar, so it was more of a long duration drought. And this year was a very intense 1-year drought. In fact, about 15 months, if you were to put end caps on it, really captures the intensity of the lack of rainfall. Just looking at some local data, in recapping the last year, again, for Corpus Christi proper, we ranked #2, driest year on record. And so 1917 actually beat the weather station at the airport. They had 5 inches of rain back during that time period. Last year, though, pretty scarce. Went from the 12 inches of rain, so a foot of rainfall. If you go up to Victoria, this was their all-time driest year on record. And so pretty startling. You don't ever want to see those types of graphics. What's also impressive is if you go back to 2010, it was the wettest year on record. So we've gone full spectrum, one of the most extreme weather events that we've seen in back-to-back years. So that's pretty phenomenal. We look back at 100 years worth of data in Corpus Christi. It just kind of captures some of those things I just mentioned. You can see, weather isn't normal. We don't get a normal 31 inches of rain every year. You have wet years, you have dry years. Sometimes you can have consecutive dry years. We call those long-term droughts. You can see how the 1930s, the Dust Bowl stands out. For those, I'll kind of highlight that on the computer screen here. The 1930s. The 1950s stands out as multiple years, consecutive years of below normal rainfall. So, that can add up to be a pretty hurtful phenomenon for farmers and ranchers, obviously. But what's most notable is that the big swings, especially in the last 20, 30 years, we generally follow a wet year with a dry year, and that's kind of been the trend. Don't know why. Still haven't solved the puzzle of why the 1930s and the 1950s drought occurred. Why did we have those long consecutive years of droughts? And certainly can't forecast drought very well in the future. In fact, if we were to look at the accuracy of weather forecasting, we can do a pretty good job out to 5 days. 5 to 7 days out, we're starting to guess. The models don't perform as well. There's some indications that we can accurately predict general trends out a month to 3 months into the future. And it gets much more challenging after that. There's some things that help pick up on long-term weather, such as El Nino and La Nina, and we'll talk about that. But this, again, just kind of captures some of the historical records here in South Texas. 1917 drought, the 1930s, 50s, and so forth. So this map here also highlights the Texas drought. You can see where the rains fell. The jet stream is oriented up to the north, Pacific Northwest across Montana and then through the Ohio River Valley. And so that shows up in those areas of blue and purple on the screen. So that's where the jet stream was. That's where all the rains fell last year. But everything in the orange and red is where there was a significant lack of rainfall. On the order of, anything in the red is below a foot of moisture, below normal. And in some parts of the Texas coast, we were 24 to 30 inches below normal. And so we saw just a tremendously dry year, and this graphic really captures that. Zooming into the coastal bend, again, we're just kind of showing the same information, but a little closer to this area. And you can see the rainfall deficits that we face, and we still are faced with those deficits. There's no deep moisture. We got a little rain in February, which I'll show you, and that just gave us that surface moisture, and that's blowing away today as we speak. So we're really desperate for moisture. Looking at the last 3 months, so we've had some rain in the last 90 days. Where has it fallen? Well, we've had a little bit in South Texas, but most of it has been up in East Texas, Louisiana, and points eastward. So a couple inches of rain in the coastal bend certainly beneficial to help things to green up out there temporarily. But again, we're lacking that deep moisture. We zoom in, here's where the rains fell. A few lucky spots. Victoria had 6 to 8 inches up there, a little 4 to 6 inches in Imperial County. Generally 2 to 4 inches across San Pat and Oasis. Here, Leroy Forrester up in northern Orange Grove, or northern Jim Wells County, he got 6 to 8 inches of rain up there, and he's sitting pretty and gotten lots of water. So just a lucky spot. But this kind of shows where we've gotten rain, and most of this just fell in February. With that, the departure from normal in the last 3 months highlights that most of the area only got about 50 to 75% of its normal rainfall in the last 90 days. So that's kind of maintaining the drought that we're in, except for parts of Jim Wells County. And a few areas in Webb and Duval as well that got above normal rainfall. This is February specific, and pretty much just says what I showed you, but this is, again, just another way to look at the rains that we got in the month of February. And then departure from normal for February. So although we've been in a dry period, February was well above normal, kind of an anomaly that stood out, and we'll take it. But when we look at the drought from kind of a national perspective, the Climate Prediction Center, which is a part of the National Weather Service, they kind of are trying to keep their arms around the drought situation that we're in. And this kind of is one way to look at it. They've got a graphic that shows where it's wet and where it's dry. And South Texas is ranked kind of in a moderate drought according to their graphics, according to their long-term Palmer Drought Index. Another graphic here kind of showing the same thing, saying we need about 3 to 6 inches of rain. I think we'll probably need maybe double that at least to start to really knock this drought out because of the severe deficits that we face. And the soil moisture anomaly. This is just based on the very end of February, so we see moisture anomalies from the soil, very dry again in South Texas, and there's been quite a bit of improvement in Northeast Texas. And soil moisture change. All of Texas was in a drought last year. You saw that map. The all of Texas red. But East Texas has really benefited from all the rains they've gotten. And so you can see the soil moisture change. You've got the property in East Texas, and it doesn't look too good here in South Texas, where it's still dry. So there's other indices that kind of capture the drought. The Keach-Byram Drought Index, maintained by Texas Forest Service and AgriLife Research, and again, it's showing drought conditions in South Texas and much improved over Northeast Texas. But the bottom line, U.S. Drought Monitor shows this part of the coastal bend in the highest level of drought you can be in, and D4, which is the driest, we call exceptional drought. And so we got a lot of recovery to get past this. And looking at the hydrologic situation, a lot of rivers are now flowing in East Texas because of the rains that they've received, but nothing really across the Nueces River Basin and points westward to the Frio and up into the western hill country. And it's considered to be in a moderate hydrologic drought in parts of those areas. So that's also not good if you're wanting to use river systems to irrigate. So we kind of look past. Now let's look forward. This is what normal looks like. And we know we don't get normal rainfall usually. It's kind of an oddity, but you never know. If you were to have normal rainfall, you'd see that the best rains come in the spring, months of April, May, and June. We do typically have a dry period in July, and then it picks up again during the hurricane season, August, September, October. September is our wettest month of the year typically. If we were to look at the spring, February, March, April, May time period, and we had a normal year, we would get anywhere from 7.5 inches to 11 inches of rainfall. More rain the further east you go, less rain the further west you go. La Nina years, you're typically going to have less rain. El Nino years, you're going to typically have more rainfall. We'll show you that in a little bit. I'd like to show just kind of under the hood and some of the models that we look at to forecast the future. This is the latest model from the GFS. This is one of the best National Weather Service models we have. And just looking ahead, this is effective at 6 o'clock this evening. And what we're watching is our next prospect for rainfall. And it's there to the west over Nevada, this big storm system. This is a jet stream. This is about 25,000 feet in the atmosphere, and so you can see these lines where they're packed close together is where there's very strong winds. And so the winds are these little wind barbs. Winds can be up to 100 miles an hour in some of those areas, and we look for X marks the spot. You see the red and the oranges on the screen. That's where there's a storm system in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And when you see one of those move over Texas, that's good. That's a good thing, because that usually causes a rising or a lifting of the atmosphere. It causes a lot of moisture to race into the area, and you get rainfall. So what we want to see is this storm system move over Texas, and in fact, that's what the models are predicting as we get into the weekend. It kind of slows down as it approaches, but this is going to be our next prospect for rainfall. The European model is a lot wetter than the National Weather Service model. And so there's some varying on how much rain we're going to get. I think further west or the Rio Grande, they may miss out completely. The further east you go toward Houston, they could get 3 to 6 inches of rainfall with this system as it moves through. But there's going to be a sharp gradient from west to east, and we're going to be kind of in the middle. We could end up with a 1/4 inch, or we could have several inches, depending on where that tight gradient lines up. As that moves through by next week, and the pattern kind of levels out, and so now we're just going to wait for the next system to come. But when I was here last week, and I showed the GFS model, it didn't show that storm system at all. And I just took you through 8 days. But really, the accuracy of these models is only good for about 5 days, especially when it's this turbulent time in springtime, and so it's just one of the tools that we use to forecast. But overall, the Hydrologic Prediction Center, they're showing this is kind of a prospect for rainfall in the next 5 days. Northeast Texas looks to get a lot of rain. We're right down on the kind of the southern fringes of that, and it just depends on where that storm moves exactly on how much rain we're going to get. But it's promising. There's a little bit of moisture coming, and let's hope we get an inch or more if it comes through, if it moves through far enough to the south. There's another forecast product. It's called the 14-Day Outlook, issued by the Climate Prediction Center. It's showing basically your probabilities of having above normal temperatures and below normal temperatures, and it's showing it looks warm over the next 2 weeks because of the weather pattern in the jet stream. So much above normal temperatures over most of the country, including South Texas. Then the rainfall forecast is quite a bit above normal too. And a lot of that is due to this weather system that's coming through now, but maybe there's some indication another system may come through next week. And so this is a little optimistic. If you're looking for rain, which we greatly need, let's hope we get some. Longer range forecast is a little tougher, and it hinges really on the state of La Nina or El Nino. What is that? La Nina is a weather phenomenon in the Pacific. Whenever the water temperatures in the Pacific Ocean get colder than normal, it changes the atmosphere. It has a huge impact on the jet stream. It pushes it well to the north, and the jet stream and all the rain occurs in the Pacific Northwest and in the Ohio Valley. And that's what we had all last year. That's why we were in a severe drought, because La Nina really helped to anchor dry air across South Texas. That's typically what we see with a La Nina weather pattern. El Nino is the opposite. El Nino is when the water temperatures get warmer than normal in the Pacific. That changes the jet stream, takes it right across the southern U.S., right across Texas, brings weather system after weather system, giving us a good prospect for rain. Usually we have above normal rainfall during an El Nino. These phenomena really show the most connections. That means if it's La Nina and you're going into the winter and the springtime, that's when it's usually the driest. La Nina, though, when you start going into the summertime, loses its grip and really doesn't have much effect on the weather in South Texas in the summertime. El Nino is similar. We're in an El Nino weather pattern. And you're moving into the fall and the winter, expect above normal rains. And those above normal conditions persist usually into the spring. And by summertime, El Nino starts to lose its effect, and we really don't see much of a signal during the summertime. Keep that in mind. So El Nino and La Nina are very good at helping us predict kind of the long-term pattern in the winter and the spring. And as we move towards summer, we kind of start losing our ability to see long-term. We've been keeping track of both of these La Nina and El Nino episodes since 1950. The blue represents La Nina year, the red represents an El Nino year. We've had strong years, we've had weak years. Look at it graphically as well and see there's really no pattern. They come and go every couple of years. Sometimes El Nino hangs around for 18 months and then goes away. Sometimes La Nina is here for 3 years in a row. And so it's just, there's no real predictability to this pattern other than it's kind of an oscillation that we can monitor, but it's really a challenge to forecast. But here's where we sit. Last winter, we had a La Nina episode, and that's why we had a dry winter last year. It really helped contribute to that dry winter we had. Kind of went away in the summertime. La Nina returned this past fall and winter, and it's going away again. When La Nina goes away, that's usually good news for South Texas. As I mentioned, we monitor that La Nina in the Pacific. These colors represent, the blue colors represent that colder than normal water temperature, but notice the change. It's starting to warm up. The oranges and the reds are showing up on the map. It's starting to switch to warmer than normal conditions. So that's a very positive change. Looking deep within the ocean, with the buoy systems that are floating in the water out there, you can see the cold water that's been in place across the eastern Pacific is starting to go away. It's starting to warm up. And you see some oranges and reds show up, and that means the ocean waters are warming. So again, it's all good news, indicating La Nina is going away. We've got a couple models that help predict La Nina. This is one of the National Weather Service models. It hasn't really been a very good performer, but it's showing that La Nina going away and becoming neutral during kind of the March, April, May time period. And that's very good news. What happens during the summer? It's showing kind of all over the place. Could be El Nino, could be neutral, but in general the trend is for neutral conditions through the summertime, but this will have a big effect on the tropics and activity in the hurricane season as well. So if it moves up to El Nino and the jet stream develops across the southern U.S., that tends to reduce the number of Atlantic storms, as that wind shear tears those tropical systems apart. But when I was here just a month ago and showed you the La Nina forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, there was no indication of it going neutral at all. It didn't perform very well, and its accuracy, its track record shows itself right here, that we don't have a whole lot of confidence in this particular model. But when you look at all the different models from the countries around the world, the Europeans, Australians seem to do very well, but overall the trend looks similar to what the most current models showing. La Nina is going away, and we could move into either neutral, possibly El Nino by late summer, and that would be a very good thing for South Texas. Why is that good? Because La Nina is usually drier than normal during the winter to spring time periods. Browns represent very dry conditions that we typically see in February to April. Kind of starts to go away in the May time period, and that's what the outlook shows right now. This is the official forecast for rainfall from the Climate Prediction Center going out through May. Still kind of, even though La Nina is dissipating, the effects of La Nina usually linger into May. And so they're still showing a slight probability of below normal rainfall over the next 3 months. Confidence is 60 to 80% of the time that La Nina is in effect, it's proven to be dry. Not 100% of the time, but a majority of the time, when La Nina is in place, we are dry in South Texas. We see 50 to 70% below normal rainfall. And that's through the springtime that we're moving through right now. In the summer, it's anybody's guess. As I mentioned, the effects of La Nina and El Nino really don't have much impact in the summertime. And so now we're at the mercy of tropical systems that start to come in the summer, and those are impossible to predict. So equal chances, I consider anybody's guess. We don't know. You can see that by the temperature forecast, it looks above normal. So it looks like a warm summer. As far as rainfall is concerned, we have an equal chance of below normal rainfall, near normal, or above normal. Similarly, for Brins, I just put the forecast out through November. Doesn't really add much value. El Nino, if we swing to El Nino by late summer, that would be a good thing because typically we see above normal rains in South Texas. In fact, here are all the different El Nino events that have occurred, and it's usually very wet in South Texas during El Nino winters. So keep that in mind, and let's hope and pray that we do get a switch to El Nino by late in the summer and certainly for next winter. El Nino, good. La Nina, bad. That's kind of how we describe it in South Texas. Unless you like drought. The official Drought Outlook changed a little bit from last week. They were a little bit hopeful that the rains that we got in February were going to help cause some improving drought conditions in South Texas, but they took that away, unfortunately. Looks like East Texas will show some drought improvement through the end of May, and it's showing that the drought will persist or intensify in South Texas, so that's not necessarily good news. Just a little bit more information on freeze conditions. As we get into the planting season, you wonder, have we had our last freeze? And I went back and pulled up some records and found all the way back to 1900, ever since we've been keeping record, we've had 20 freezes in March. So if you add all that up, it's about a little bit less than a 20%. 20% of the time, we've seen a freeze in March. And these are the particular years that it did freeze. And so the very last freeze day, technically, officially at the airport, was March 31st. And in looking at the weather pattern right now, over the next several weeks, there's no indication that an Arctic blast is coming south anytime soon, so we may be done as far as our freeze is concerned. Other cities that have had freezing conditions, these are their last freeze dates. April 3rd shows up as their last freeze date, further to the north in Beeville and in Laredo out to the west. And other sites, pretty similar. When you get to the end of March or the 1st of April, it's about the end of the winter freezing season. One last note, outdoor burn bans are currently in effect for every place that's highlighted in red. We went back to last September, everybody was in red, so there have been improving conditions, including the Oasis County and Duval as well. At any time you have winds blowing like they are today, anything over 20 miles an hour, and humidities that are 30% or less, we consider that an extreme fire danger. And we'll put out what we call a red flag warning. And that's a day you don't want to burn. If you burn on a red flag day, when these conditions are in effect, your little embers that burn are going to float up into the air, and they could travel downwind a mile or more without extinguishing because the air is so dry. And cause spot fires or a wildfire that can end up developing, and if the winds are strong enough, it can move extremely fast and get out of control on you. And we've seen some big fires in South Texas. Last year we had the biggest fire season in Texas history, 4 million acres burned. Our fire season is right now. March is the peak month because of the winds. Today we have a good case of strong winds in place, but the humidity is too high, so it's not a fire day. But usually it happens after a cold front, and if your winds are blowing very strong, humidity is very low, be careful out there. You can track all this information from home on our website. I told you the website at the beginning is weather.gov/Corpus Christi. Go down to the bottom, you can click on Drought, and you'll see we put reports on there every couple weeks detailing all the information that I've shared with you today. You can get all these graphics from the Climate Prediction Center website, and that's all available from your home computer. To summarize, February was unusually wet considering the La Nina conditions that have been in place, but it looks good. There's a positive trend that La Nina is going away, and it should dissipate in the next couple of months. Most of the models show La Nina going away in probably neutral conditions through the summer, but that really doesn't help us in determining whether, what type of weather pattern we're going to see in the summertime. It's really, it's going to be anybody's guess. Let's hope for a more normal rainfall season. We need a good 15 to 20 inches to recover from last year's drought. And I don't see that coming anytime soon until probably a tropical system comes in if we get fortunate enough. And that concludes my presentation. Anybody have any questions?
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
I know it might sound stupid, nothing
Sure.
to do with the drought. But tell me, why are the major storms developing from Africa? What's the reason?
Why do the storms, the tropical storms and hurricanes,
Coming out.
well, why do hurricanes and tropical storms move west?
Yeah.
It's basically in the summertime, high pressure, a big dome of high pressure develops over the Atlantic Ocean. The winds around that high pressure blow clockwise. So every storm that moves off Africa is going to go to the west. It's basically like a river of air that's moving around that big high pressure dome. So high pressure in the Atlantic really controls the steering of the tropics in the summertime. So in the wintertime, the high pressure shifts south, and then the weather patterns go west to east, and we get into the westerlies. But in the summer, it gets hot over the northern hemisphere, and so the high pressure shifts north. Now we start looking at the weather pattern moving from east to west.
Other questions? I've got one. Sometimes you hear meteorologists talking about cutoff lows. Does that mean that it's out of the jet stream, or?
It is. It usually, when the jet stream buckles, your area will just kind of move off on its own and sit there, and there's nothing to move it out until another storm system were to come in, or the jet stream were to orient itself to pick that system up and move it out. Usually when a cutoff low forms, it slowly will dissipate over time. But if it cutoff sits on top of you, you're in for a long duration wet period. So